Hello buddy, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we're on Carrick-on-Gore playing as the Beastmen against the forces of the Skaven. And for this matchup I wanted to do a bit of a Vanguard build, just sort of rush in there and try to beat up my opponent. Obviously against Skaven this does have its own risks. Beastmen Vanguard options, not the greatest at dealing with things like Doom Wheels. Obviously Centaurs can do some stuff, but it can be an issue. Definitely you don't have necessarily the raw stopping power of something like a Minotaur if you do that. But I figured, if my opponent deploys and I'm able to get it with artillery and is trying to be shooty and I can get up in his face, things will go great. We'll run him over. It'll be lots of fun. So for my build, well, I did actually bring Morgar. I wanted to have a safer lord. Obviously, Khazrak would make more sense, but Khazrak is squishy to Warp Lightning cannons. And if I lose, basically with Beastmen, if you lose your leader early into the game and your opponent has anything that causes fear or terror, the game is basically over. You have lost. So that is why I really wanted to bring Morgar, because he's just so tanky against magic missiles. So 100% resistance, obviously reduced to 90, but still, it's just nuts. He also does get those two summons of Chaos Spawn, which are nifty for shutting down or stalling Skaven. You call Violence and Foe Seeker, so all in all, decent. He's not terrible in melee either against Skaven Footlords. He can kind of tie them down. Obviously, you could try to bring Malagor as well, but Malagor is a bit squishier, and I don't really care for the magic, or I didn't really care for the magic too much here. Alongside him, we did bring a Bray Shaman of Beasts. We are bringing simply Flock of Doom as well as Transformation of Kadon, looking to get some of those Manticore summons off, potentially getting some terror outs. This build doesn't have any fear of terror otherwise, but the Manticore summon definitely potent, potentially. Jagged Dagger for Winds of Magic, Wild Heart, of course, for the extra Winds of Magic, and he is on a chariot, so he can get to the fight faster, and then he can run over infantry if needed. For my front line here, it is simply a horde of Goreherd with shields. Not much to be said there. 3 units of them, then the Blackhorns Ravagers in the center. Blackhorns Ravagers are basically just a normal Goreherd with immunity to Vigor and 20 more armor. And of course, they do also have the better stats because they're a tier level or veteran C9 unit. It is also worth mentioning that with Rowdy you get extra leadership, so they actually get even more leadership than a high veteran C unit would get, which is pretty cool in my opinion. In the second line, it is simply a horde of Goreherd, so these are the damage Igors. These guys have the dual wielding axes. They are capable of sort of running over the cheaper trash, and obviously much more susceptible to shooting because they don't have shields, but still they can do quite a lot to most Skaven lower tier infantry, especially things like Plague Monks and whatnot, and Clan Rats. And then finally we do have 3 units of Ungor Raiders to apply some pressure to units like Rat Ogres and Hell Pit Abominations and that sort of stuff. On the flanks, to flank as well as shut down things like Doom Wheels or hopefully at least contest them, we do have some Chaos Warhounds with poison, as well as Sons of Goros over here, and normal Centaur Great Weapons and Hounds on the other flank. As you kind of can figure from my deployment, I was anticipating my opponent to be somewhere here in the middle, and instead he deployed all over here, which makes some sense. Perhaps they're not wanting this rock in the way, not wanting to be close to the trees. It's actually a pretty sound strategy in my opinion. For his lord, my opponent is rolling with Lord Skrulk. The filthy rat is over here on the ground, advancing straight into the fray. He has a very wide deployment, and this is actually not a bad idea in my opinion, because one of the things Beastmen will try to do oftentimes is swarm you from all sides, but with this sort of defense in depth and very wide deployment, it would be potentially difficult for me to get in there and shut down everything for good. So my opponent does have Lord Skrulk in here. He's got Pestilent Breath. He does have Vermintide, as well as the Pestilent Birth. He also has Stand Your Ground, Rod of Corruption, and Lee Rubonicus. Fortunately, Morgar, not exactly the most susceptible to Rod of Corruption, but still, or Lee Rubonicus, but it can still do a lot of damage to my caster. It can do damage to my Centaurs, that sort of stuff. Otherwise, my opponent does have a Hell Pit Abomination as well as a Doom Wheel, so some anti-large and anti-infantry smushing power. Gutter Runners as well as Gutter Runners with poison on the either flank, or on one on each flank. Some Skaven Slave Spears. The front line, very motley assortment. Some Plague Monks, some Spears, some Clan Rats, Stormmen, Clan Rat Spears. Perhaps struggling with costs somewhere. My opponent definitely had a very motley assortment of troops. But then, surprisingly, 6 Skaven Slave Slingers, so a very heavy DACA formation there. Warp Lightning Cannon in the back to counter my large, and then some Rat Ogres over here on the flank to probably protect if I tried to push in early on. Now the lines are immediately moving in. Of course, both our builds fairly, well, not really fairly, but my build was very aggressive, so I had to push in. Unfortunately, a bit offset here, so not really getting the ideal engagements, but still, we are trying to get in there. The Doom Wheel here shutting down my Ungor Raiders, being a major pain in the rear, and I do throw in my Sons of Goros trying to chase it off, but unfortunately, this is going to be a bit of a problem, because that Warp Lightning Cannon is going to start wailing on me, and of course Rod of Corruption goes down, and my opponent is just melting my blob here. So definitely, things were not looking great to begin with. Now in the meantime, the Hell Pit Abomination here plowing through the formation, jumping into all these Blackhorns Ravagers and Goreherd and Ungors and all that sort of stuff. But I do simply ignore them and push on. You can see my chariot here running amok, squishing these Stormmen, Shade's just so good at killing models and running elite infantry over. Just look at this guy. He's already up to this 18 kills. Now, sure, some of this is probably friendly fire as well, but he's just slaughtering those Stormmen, those Clan Rats, and this really does show how good these Spray Shamans can be. Elsewhere, the Yellow Pit was tying down some Ungors, but we were able to just start peppering it down, and we got some Gors swarming all over it. Obviously, Gors not anti-large, nothing impressive there, but they will be able to bog it down. And in the meantime, we are going to get more growth here, trying to bog down these Clan Rat Spirits who are, and Stormmen who are pursuing my poor Ungors. Fortunately, of course, Beastmen quick on their feet, and so they are able to skedaddle out of there, reposition, and keep peppering this Ungor, while we do summon some Chaos Spawn on top of these Stormmen to bog them down and prevent them from being too much of a nuisance. Now, this stage of the game, balance of power is still very much in the middle. Fortunately, we have managed to get on top of the Warp Lightning Cannon, though a little too late for the Sons of Goros. But the Warp Lightning Cannon getting taken offline over here. We've actually managed to sneak a Gore Horde through the center. So my opponent definitely had a lack of melee infantry, so we are able to sort of flank and run around with these Gore Horde with shields. And despite the fact that in the center, things are definitely a bit of a struggle. Our Ungor Raiders fleeing, Sons of Goros chased off the field, these Gore Horde fleeing, and that sort of stuff, definitely not looking great. We are able to completely compromise the backline. My opponent forgot about his poor rat ogres over there. And now we are sort of collapsing on my opponent from all sides. Obviously, the Hell Pit is a big nuisance, but it's not really going to be able to shut down, say, Skrull. Or more. Oh, yes, he's Skrull, guys. See, I can't even talk. I'm a disgrace. But he's not able to shut down Morgr. And he's getting peppered continuously by those Ungor Raiders. Now, sure, the Doom Wheel is in here, being a pain in the rear, but we're kind of able to ignore it and just keep pounding away at the rest of my opponent's army, and he's not able to protect his backlines. Over here, the Brave Shaman of Beasts plowing through the Skaven slaves, just compromising them. They're getting surrounded. We're dropping flocks of doom continuously. I didn't actually get the Manticore summon off, which is kind of sad. I was hoping to test that unit out, but it's just not happening. Flock of doom just melting these blobs, and this constant harassment, we're just collapsing on my opponent from all sides. And our Cav is just doing cleanup in aisle 9 here. You can see the balance of power already swinging to about 60 or 70 30, 60, 40, 70, 30, something like that. Very decisively in favor over here. Chaos Spawn's coming in. My opponent is now very much on his last legs. It's simply this pocket of Clan Rats, summoned Clan Rats to boot, Skrulk, and this Doom Wheel. And then the Hell Pit Abomination out here on the flank. But otherwise, most of my opponent's army is being routed, and we do have just enough Cav to chase these units off the field. And of course, one of the nice things about Beastmen is that as long as our leadership's in an okay spot, because of their one ability, the Primal Fury, they're able to stay on top. They've got 43 speed, for example, which is just a little bit faster than the routing rats or normal rats like Skaven slaves. So we're actually able to pursue these troops off the field, so removing them from play. Over here, these Skaven slaves completely give up on the fight, almost slaughtered to a man, just showing how much to clean up we're doing here. Really not letting any of the rats get home. And the Hell Pit, obviously, it has good mass, but it is a very slow unit, so it is getting bogged down. It's going to be slowed down here by the Chaos Spawn with their poison. It's being prevented from escaping. Obviously, this is not an ideal fight for the Chaos Spawn. They would probably lose, but bogging down the Hell Pit here means that the archers are going to be able to reposition and start peppering it down. At this stage, it just doesn't really matter. My opponent does not have the numbers, really. And balance of power is going to start swaying in my favor. He does try to get a little bit of a recharge there against the Black Orange Ravagers, but they don't give a darn. And it is going to be GG for the forces of the Beastmen. So close victory, and a bit of a fun one. A very fast sort of blitz match. We just swarmed all over my opponent's troops and with the Beastie Boys. But definitely at the beginning of the game, it actually came somewhat close. My opponent managed to slaughter the Sons of Goros. He removed an entire very valuable cavalry unit almost completely from play. He managed to rout quite a lot of my center forces, so that was definitely working out well. But I do think that in the end, the lack of enough front line really kind of screwed him over there. Obviously, I think Skaven against Beastmen, it's a bit of an interesting matchup. Both factions are in many ways comparable. Obviously, Skaven have the artillery, whereas Beastmen have the light cavalry forces, but in many ways, the factions do play in a similar fashion. They're very rush-heavy, very sort of light infantry-heavy, very rush-oriented, almost very quick on their feet. Factions with some decent cherry play, fairly generally footlords and that sort of stuff. So in many ways, they're comparable. It's just that the support tools are a bit different, and so it's always a bit of an interesting matchup. I do think that a Vanguard build, it might not. It's a decent build against Skaven because you can rush them down. The problem is that if your opponent goes with a super monster, say your opponent brings a bunch of Plague Furnaces and monsters, Vanguard builds are probably going to suffer a lot. There's not too much you can do. You really need the Minotaurs, I think, to crack something. If my opponent here, say, brought 2 Doom Wheels and a Plague Furnace, my build would not be able to handle that, really, in my opinion. Maybe we could, depending on how my opponent's exact micro and skill level is, but in practice I think it would be incredibly difficult because you've got so little AP. It's basically all wrapped up in these centaurs, so perhaps a bit of a mistake there in my sort of build as well. I could have probably brought some throwing axes or something like that, maybe ditch 2 of these gore herd and cut some costs somewhere and free up a couple hundred points for like 2 units of centaurs throwing axes. But nonetheless, it can be difficult, and I think minotaurs are a big edge there if you do a more conventional build. Now, as for my opponent here, my main critique is that he went too wide with his shooting. There was too much shooting. Obviously, he had some monsters, but what I think is that he was kind of trying to cover maybe not even all angles, but all sort of be competitive in almost every field, and the end result was that he wasn't competitive in any field, really. My opponent, he had a boatload of cheap shooting. He had a weird front line that included a mix of fairly elite infantry and some very cheap infantry, some monsters in there. And I think you're better off sort of either invest in your shooting and rely on shooting, which in my opinion is not necessarily the best against Beastmen, to be honest. Because Beastmen have some very, very nasty counters to shooting. Or you go much more heavy onto the sort of melee side of things. And you bring plague monks, stormmen, back them up with the rat ogres, plague furnaces, hell pits, that sort of stuff. Just bring a handful of the sort of skirmishers to zone off throwing axes, basically. And I think personally that's my preference in this matchup, but I definitely think you should go one way or the other. And I think these sort of trying to do a sort of mix mash build where you've got some good stuff from each category is not really going to work out. Regardless, well played to my opponent Kit and I here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it entertaining and fun. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, any requests, as usual, don't hesitate to post them down below. I will do my very best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.